All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our office hours webinar for BrainHQ. We're so glad that you could be joining us today. My name is Stephanie and I will be one of your co-hosts for today's webinar. Now, our goal for the Office Hour webinar series, maybe if you're new here, is to show off a specific feature or two, and then we'll open the floor and answer any questions that you might have about those features. In today's topic, we'll be covering the auditory exercises within BrainHQ. So Henry is going to go over why some of the speech may sound distorted in some exercises, why it's important to be able to hear the subtle differences between syllables and sounds, and also how the exercises eventually come to build on one another. So if at any point you'd like to ask a question, you can click the Q&A button on the Zoom control panel and a new window should pop up. You can type in your questions there and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can after the presentation. Now, there are a lot more of you in the audience than there are of us. So that means that we aren't going to be able to answer every question personally. However, if you do have any follow-up questions, you can send those to our support team at support@brainhq.com. We also have a support site, which you can find at support.brainhq.com, that will have answers to a lot of common questions. Now, the other thing that I wanted to note is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel sometime next week. If you'd like to be notified when that video goes live, you can go to youtube.com/brainhq to subscribe there in order to receive a notification. Now, everyone who is registered for this webinar today will also receive an email sometime next week with any follow-up resources that we may mention, and it will also include a link to this replay. Now, I mentioned him earlier, but today's presentation is run by Dr. Henry Manka. Henry, you want to say hi?
Hey, folks. Can you hear me okay, Stephanie?
Coming in great. For those of you who haven't met Henry before, he earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco. That's where he studied brain plasticity with our co-founder, Dr. Michael Merzenick, and he's been running the show as our CEO here at Posit Science since 2011. All right, so Henry, how you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much. Let me turn my screen share on.
All right, sounds good.
Let's see if we can give this a go. Thanks. So as Stephanie said, I'm going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes about these auditory exercises and show some demos, but we certainly want the most of our time today with our hour together to be taking questions from you all. So start to think about what questions you have for us, and we look forward to answering them. So hey, thanks everyone for coming. As Stephanie has said, today's focus in our office hours is about the auditory exercises in BrainHQ. And I'm going to spend our time talking about hearing and demoing how to do several of the auditory exercises. You know, these exercises really make BrainHQ unique. We've put a lot of effort into building brain training exercises specifically designed to target hearing and the auditory system of the brain. And in fact, our founder, Dr. Michael Merzenick, he came up as a young scientist studying the auditory system way back when. And in fact, when he was doing that, most neuroscientists were studying the visual system. So Mike was a bit of an odd duck. He used that knowledge then to help invent the Cochlear Implant, which you may have heard of. That's a medical device that can actually help people who are profoundly deaf hear again. Can even help very young children who are born without a sense of hearing. So as a result of all that science around hearing and the auditory system, we actually built these brain training exercises first. These were the first exercises we built at Posit Science. If you've been with us for a long time, like I have, you might remember these back when we sold a CD-ROM program called the Brain Fitness Program. These are the first exercises we built, and actually the first ones that we took out in large-scale clinical trials to show that these helped improve cognitive function and brain function in all kinds of people. So we're very proud of them. Let's take a tour. So here's something interesting. We don't always hear what we want to hear, right? Sometimes we miss something because it's just a little bit too quiet, right? Where our hearing just isn't quite as sensitive as we need it to be. Can't hear someone in the next room. Sometimes we start to experience high frequency hearing loss, right? Maybe you have a wristwatch with a high frequency alarm and you haven't heard it beeping. Sometimes we have a hard time hearing rapid speech, right? People around us talk too fast and we can't quite keep up with them. I've been accused of that myself many times. Other times we're in a noisy environment, right? Maybe you've been to a restaurant and thought, I'm just not enjoying my meal because I can't hear the person that I came to the restaurant with because the music is too loud or the conversation is too loud. All of these things can affect our brain's ability to process, understand, remember, and act upon the information that's coming in through our ears. So, why is that? Why can't we just hear what people say? How hard could it be? Well, let's look at two words, time and kind. So these are easy enough to tell apart when they're written, right? The T is quite different than the K visually. So let's look at these words, time and kind, the way the ear hears them. So this sort of little pattern here is called a spectrogram. And what it does is scientists use this to visualize a sound. And the way to look at this is to realize that the horizontal axis, as I move my arrow here, this is time. This is how the sound evolves through time. The vertical axis is frequency, with lower sounds down here at the bottom and higher sounds up here at the top, just like on a piano. And then how dark the image is shows us how much sound energy is there at this point in time and this frequency. So you can see that when we say the word time, this is all the T sound. You see there's three main bands of sound energy. And this one at the bottom stays a little bit and then swoops down. This one in the middle swoops up. This one at the top swoops down. There's a lot going on. And how about the sound kind? Well, here's the K sound. And somewhat distressingly, they look pretty similar. Here's the bottom one swooping down. Here's the middle one swooping up. And in fact, the main difference between the T sound and the K sound is really up here at this tiny top band of sound energy, where with a T, it swoops down, and with a K, it swoops up. So that's pretty hard to tell the difference between just looking at, and you can imagine why your ear might get mixed up about that too. And in fact, your brain has a really short period of time to detect this subtle difference in sound, and then the rest of the word sound comes in, and it can actually interrupt our brain while we're still trying to figure out this first part of the sound. So in order to hear this difference between time and kind accurately, the auditory system has to be working quickly and accurately to get its job done, to let us process the sound, understand what part of speech it is, store the word in memory, and maybe remember it later and then act on it. Now, all kinds of things can happen in the brain to make that harder. If our brain's a bit noisy, maybe because of our age, or, maybe something had happened to our brain. We got a bonk on the head and our brain is not working quite as well as it used to. All those things can make our brain information processing noisier and make it harder for our auditory system to notice and detect these very subtle differences in sound. So that's why we built the auditory training exercises in BrainHQ. These exercises are designed to work together to make information processing in the hearing system faster and more accurate, to help the brain notice and distinguish these very fine, subtle differences in sound that are so important for speech. There's about 7 of these exercises. I'm going to demo just 3 of them today, but we can talk about any of them during the Q&A part. And these exercises are designed to work together. Each of these exercises, from sound sweeps all the way down to here, is designed to help improve a specific part of the brain's speech processing system. So an exercise like sound sweeps, which I'm going to demo, and if you've done it, you hear these little whistle sounds, and they form the very basis of those little swooping pieces of sound we saw on that spectrogram before. An exercise like fine tuning helps us specifically understand and hear the difference between consonants like da and ga. Syllable stacks and memory grids extend that processing to short pieces of short words. And then with exercises like to-do list, we work on whole sentences. And then as we go up this hierarchy, we start to engage memory with exercises like to-do list in the know, which targets social cognition, and even here at the end, which helps focus our brain's attention on certain sounds and help us suppress other sounds that are distracting. So all in all, these exercises work together like pieces in a puzzle to make our brain faster and more accurate and be able to notice those fine distinctions very well. So let's start off and let's look at an exercise like sound sweeps. And hopefully this is right here. Can you hear me okay still, Stephanie?
Yep, and I'm seeing the level selection screen.
Great, so let's just do the first level of sound sweeps together. So the way this exercise works, if you haven't seen it before, is we're going to click Start. And then we're going to hear two sweep sounds presented one after another. And if you don't know what a sweep is, don't worry, you're about to hear one. Let's make sure my volume is nice and loud. So I'm hearing the instructions. And as you know, whenever you see an instruction, you can click this little arrow to see the next instruction. Each of these sounds can either go up from a lower pitch to a higher pitch or down from a higher pitch to a lower pitch. So let's hear what we mean by an up sweep to start with. Can everyone hear that? Could you hear that okay, Stephanie?
I couldn't quite tell. The sweep may have happened too fast for Zoom to pick it up.
Oh, all right. Well, that's going to be, we'll just do our best in that case. Yeah. That sound sounded like this. It sounded like, so a little whistle sound that went up. And we hear that sound going up. We click on the up arrow. Now it's going to give me a down sound. How about that one, Stephanie? Did that come through?
That one did come through, yeah.
Great. So that one, as you can hear, started high and went down. So we click the down button. So now we're going to hear two of them in a row. And this is where it gets harder because when they get closer together, they can get mixed up in our brain. In that case, the first one went up and the second one went down. So I click the up button and now I click the down button. So let's do a few more of these together. Well, that was an up and then a down. We can mix them up in any order. This one was a down and then an up.
It seems like the exercise sounds aren't coming in anymore, but we are getting the confirmation sounds, like the little beep sounds when you get them correct. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, well, I'm going to try one quick thing. If I can put everything on hold for a minute and see if there's a setting that I'm supposed to change here to make this sound work better. Can you hang on for just a moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's try this, Stephanie. I've changed a setting that allegedly is going to make Zoom get the sound right out of my computer. So let's see if that works.
All right. There we go. Coming in loud and clear now.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. You know, every time I do a Zoom conference, I still learn one more thing. So that one, the first sound went up. The second one went down. Do one or two more now that it's working. So they can also occur two in a row. That was down and then down. So you might ask, what are these weird little whistle sounds have to do with anything? Why would I want a brain that can hear these little whistle sounds more often? You know, I'm not a woodpecker. And the answer is, if you remember those little spectrograms I showed you with those parts of speech like time and kind, and I think I can go back to them. Let's see how that works. So that little whistle sound that you heard, that's actually pretty much exactly the same shape as this sound here in the T, or going up, this sound here in the K. And so what we're doing with auditory sweeps is we're training your brain to be ready, to be fast and accurate, to notice these kinds of sounds because they form the building blocks of speech in that way. So that's sound sweeps. And of course, as you do the exercise, it gets faster and faster to make it more and more like what you actually hear in speech. And if you get one wrong, no worries, it'll slow down and back down. So it'll be exactly the right speed for your personal brain. But let's build up just a little bit more. Let's move to something that's a little bit more like a speech sound. In this case, let's talk about fine tuning. So before I show you the fine-tuning exercise, I want to talk just a little bit more about these parts of speech and how they work. So you'll recognize this spectrogram already because we just looked at something like that. In this case, we're looking at a sound like da. And before we actually show the exercise, I want to do a participatory exercise. Everyone online can do this together with me right now. If you hold out your finger and your thumb, and you put it right on your voice box in your throat, just enough you can feel your voice box. I don't want it to hurt. I don't want you to have any problems breathing, just enough you can feel your voice box. And now I want you to make a little sound. And the sound I want you to make is pa, like my papa, P-A. Make that sound pa, pa. Now you may notice as you make that sound, pa, that you feel your lips open just a little bit before your voice box starts to vibrate, pa. Okay, now make a different sound. Now I want you to make a sound ba, kind of like a bottle, ba, ba. Now, as you do that, you may notice that your voice box starts to vibrate at exactly the same time your lips start to open. That very short difference between when your lips open and when your voice box starts to vibrate is actually the main difference between a ba and a pa. So again, we need a brain that's very fast and accurate to notice that short gap. So we're going to correctly hear these distinctions in speech. Now, we're looking at that same kind of sound here, and that's in this case, it's a da. And you'll remember we have these little bands of sweeping energy right here. And in the exercise fine-tuning, we're going to ask people to tell the difference between these little speech sounds like ba and pa, or maybe da and ga in this case. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to start off with sounds where we have stretched them out and made them emphatic. So we're making these sweeps as big and bold as we can. But then as the exercise gets harder, we're going to compress that da or ga sound. We're going to make it fast and soft. And you can see that's where it's stretched and emphasized. And you can see as we make it harder, it's actually going to be quite difficult to even notice these little bands of sound energy. And that's going to train our brain to become really good at it. So let's do a few of these together. So this is fine tuning. Again, we'll hit start and we'll have it give us a few instructions. It's going to take a minute to load the sounds. So as it tells us, we're going to hear one of two increasingly similar syllables. And by syllable, we mean a sound like ba or pa or ga. And then we simply have to identify which one we heard.
Ga.
Okay, so it starts off and that's a big, bold ga sound. So we go ahead and click ga. Now let's do a few together. We'll give it a minute to start.
Ga.
Okay, hopefully that sound is coming through okay. That's a ga.
Da.
Now, if you were able to hear that clearly, and again, this works better directly on your computer than in Zoom, but you might have heard that had a shorter, sharper sound at the beginning, and that's what made it a da.
Da.
Yeah, that short sound, duh. You can do this with yourself. Make a duh sound versus a g sound. As you make that duh sound, you can feel how short and sharp that is, whereas the g sound is a little bit more drawn out.
Da.
Another da.
Ga.
Oh, but they got a little faster, and I got one wrong. So again, we are making those shorter and longer in order to make it a little bit easier or a little bit more challenging for your ear and your brain to distinguish. And the reason we're doing that is, of course, we want your brain to be able to make those distinctions when someone is talking quickly to you or when you're in a noisy room or all kinds of challenging listening situations like that. The third exercise I'm going to show before we then go on to Q&A is I want to take that concept and extend it into whole words. So here we're going to take a quick look at the syllable stacks exercise. And in syllable stacks, it's actually going to give us a list of words, and we're going to have to remember them. But they're going to sound a little funny at first, and we'll talk about why. So let me click Start. It's going to load up the sounds. Okay.
Gum, fig, dish.
So it gave us three words, and they were gum and fig and dish. But you may have thought, well, that sounded weird. Was that my internet connection? But no, those sounded weird on purpose. And at these levels of the syllable stacks exercise, sometimes people tell us it sounds like it's underwater or it sounds like it's muffled. So why is that? Well, what's happening here is we've taken that sound like gum and we've actually stretched out the g and stretched out the sound. And so that's why it sounds a little weird and unnatural. But by stretching it out and slowing it down, we actually make it a little bit easier for a brain to process at first. And so even though they don't sound quite like normal English words, they're good English words for training a brain that's maybe starting a little slow to get faster. Gum, fig, dish. Let's do one more, just hear them and hear how odd they sound.
Gash, sit, fig.
Gash, sit. And I'll hit fig in just a minute. But if you heard them, they really sound
Leah had asked, why in syllable stacks does the S sound like an F? Is it only me? No, so that's actually very much intentional. So in the same way that time and kind have those very short fricative sounds at the beginning of the words, those phonemes, those short beginning sounds of those words also apply to S and F. So like if you say psi and phi and you were to look at those on a spectrogram, those spectrograms would be almost identical, except for that very short beginning burst of sound when you say those words. So if you are hearing S and F sounds, those are what we call confusable pairs. And those are included by design to help try and get your brain to analyze that information a little bit more quickly and accurately. All right, let's see here. I do a fair amount of Zoom and it's not infrequent that it seems to freeze. Yeah, sometimes Zoom is a little funky. All right, Henry, it looks like we have you back here. Your video's coming in, but your audio isn't coming in just yet.
Okay, hopefully.
Okay, there we go.
Hey folks, I don't know what happened. I'm having quite a day. My computer just decided it was a better time to be off rather than on. So
oh no.
I had a little battle of willpower here, and I suppose that I have won in the end, but my apologies for stepping out. Stephanie, I could show the last little bit of that and then take questions, or maybe we should just move on to take questions at this point.
Yeah, I've already started answering a couple of questions that have come in. So one question that we are getting a lot of is using BrainHQ with hearing aids and how that can affect your training. My short answer to that was yes, if it's comfortable for you, we do encourage you to wear your hearing aids when training with BrainHQ. But I know we've previously worked with populations that have specifically used hearing aids. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit and sort of what we tell for them?
It's a great question. So, and in fact, it's such a great question that we had the same question ourselves when we ran the first big study of these auditory exercises. We ran a very large clinical trial that we did with Mayo Clinic and the University of Southern California, almost 500 people involved in the study. And one of the things we did was very carefully, ask people and then record, hey, do you use a hearing aid? And hey, do you have hearing loss? And then we were able to ask the scientific question. On the average, of course, we saw improvements in brain performance and cognitive function in that study. That was a wonderful breakthrough study. But we could ask the question, hey, did having a hearing aid matter? Did having hearing loss matter? And it turned out that the answer to both those questions was no. People who had hearing aids and did not have hearing aids both experienced the same improvements in cognitive function. People who had hearing loss and did not have hearing loss both experienced the same improvements in cognitive function. And so, what that told us was, hey, when people do these exercises, what we tell them is that, hey, if you already have a hearing aid, you should do these exercises with your hearing aid in. If you don't have a hearing aid, do them without your hearing aid, but don't change how your brain normally listens to sound when you do the exercises, because we want to train your brain to listen to sound in exactly the normal way that your brain does. And in fact, we have wonderful research collaborators at Northwestern who've gone on to investigate this question more carefully. And they have found that these auditory exercises, exactly that, they work well with people with hearing loss and without hearing loss, with hearing aids and without it. And they specifically went on and confirmed that one of the benefits of doing these auditory brain training exercises is that people get better at hearing in speech and noisy environments because they have those faster and more accurate brains. But it's such a great question. At the risk of talking too long, Stephanie, I will say one other thing about it, which is, one of the challenges about getting a hearing aid is that usually you get one well after your brain started to need one. And what that means is your brain has already kind of gotten used to the lower quality information that's been coming in from your ear. And because the brain is plastic and it reorganizes itself, it's kind of adapted to that lower volume information. A lot of people, when they get a hearing aid, they think it's going to be perfect on day one. And that's not most people's experience. The hearing aid makes the sound louder, but the brain is accustomed to the old hearing, and it actually takes a while for the brain to rewire itself to get accustomed to the new hearing. And one of the things that we think that these BrainHQ auditory exercises might do is if you've just gotten a hearing aid, they might help your brain get used to using the hearing aid and use it better more quickly than if you're just going about your normal business. And so we're certainly encouraging people who have hearing aids and people who've just gotten them to do these BrainHQ auditory exercises to help the brain, get accustomed to the great new hearing aid that you've gotten. Wonderful question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to send it right back to you with this one because I know you have a good answer for this. But we have a lot of people coming into the Q&A section asking about how tinnitus can be affected by BrainHQ exercises, how it affects your environmental hearing, so on and so forth. Can you maybe talk to some of the science behind that and what our recommendations are for that?
It's a great question. For those of you who don't know, tinnitus is it's a symptom where a person just hears a ringing in their ears is how it's usually described. And it's a kind of an ongoing sound. And hey, if you don't have it at all, that's wonderful. Some people have mild symptoms where from time to time they hear it and it's not that irritating. Some people can have it quite severely and they hear this kind of ringing sound, a lot during the day, and they find the sound, irritating or distracting or annoying. And it can really, really be a pretty significant issue for people's quality of life. And then the natural question is, hey, where does tinnitus come from, or tinnitus? People pronounce it in both different ways. Where does it come from exactly? And right now, what the best science tells us is that tinnitus comes not from the ear itself, but it actually comes from the brain. And it's as if the part of your brain that normally should hear that sound just kind of becomes spontaneously active all by itself. So even though the ear isn't doing very much, the brain just starts to activate that little region of the brain, and that makes us kind of hear this sound. And that's why covering up our ears or various things doesn't really help, because of course the tinnitus is not really coming from the ear. So there have been a couple studies using these auditory exercises with tinnitus. And long story short, we don't know quite yet. In the best of those studies, there were certainly people who had tinnitus that the BrainHQ exercises helped, but there were also people who had tinnitus who it did not seem to help. And so we're not quite sure what makes the difference between those two kinds of people, right? One answer might be that the BrainHQ exercises aren't exactly designed for tinnitus. And if we went back to the lab and designed a more specific set of sounds, so for example, many people who have tinnitus, they can actually characterize exactly what their sound sounds like where it is on the notes on a piano. And so one thing that we have thought about is, hey, maybe we could design exercises where someone could describe their tinnitus to BrainHQ, and then we could design auditory exercises exactly right for them. That would be a very exciting thing to do. So right now, we can't reliably recommend BrainHQ exercises to help with tinnitus, but certainly some people have written to us and said that it has helped with their tinnitus. So you may want to give it a try. At the same time, if you are doing these auditory exercises and for whatever reason your tinnitus gets worse, we would certainly suggest, hey, you should stop and focus on the visual exercises. I have a lot of sympathy for this problem. I don't have chronic tinnitus, but it does come on me from time to time when I'm tired or stressed, and it's quite noticeable. And I could see that if I had it a lot more than that, then I would be worried. And other questions than that, you should certainly talk to your doctor. There are certainly some new interesting sound therapies out there besides BrainHQ that some people have found with tinnitus as well. So great topic, great brain plasticity question.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. So here's a question that we often get from our friends abroad. How do you deal with exercises that deal with American accents? So sometimes we'll get emails from our friends over in the UK or in Australia, for example, saying, hey, I understand English, but I can't quite understand the accent. Is there any sort of way to get around that? Or is there a way to change the exercise or the accent for those?
It is a great question. We do speak differently here in America than either in Australia or in the UK, as has of course been legendarily said about the US and the UK, right? Two countries separated by a common language. Yes. And it's a real issue. And when we have built BrainHQ in a number of languages, you can go to your profile and you'll see it in German and Arabic and French and all kinds of languages like that. And in non-English languages, for a number of them, our scientists have actually built those sounds, for example, in fine tuning, specifically so that those are the right consonants for those languages. You might imagine it's different in German than it is in English. But we haven't yet had the opportunity to do that for British English and Australian English. And all I can say is that I apologize for that. It's definitely an important issue. That's something that's been brought to us a number of times. I hope we have the opportunity and the resources to re-record those sounds with a great, authentic Australian or British accent in the future, because I could see how that would be helpful. That being said, even doing these in an American English, they're still designed to make your brain faster and more accurate. They're going to sound a bit weird because it's going to sound like me talking as opposed to you and your friends, but they're still going to do, have underlying benefit for brain health and brain processing. So I encourage you to keep with them, and it's something we would love to come back to improve the product in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to add to that, what we generally say in customer support when people bring this comment to us is, it's okay to expose yourself to new things. Your brain actually craves novelty a lot of the time. And so by exposing yourself to different dialects and different accents, you're actually really kind of opening up those pathways, and you're engaging your brain in a way that you don't normally do, which is a good thing.
I think that is excellent advice. And as an avid fan of quite a bit of British television, it's probably been good for my brain in that way as well to hear the
Absolutely. All right. We have a couple of questions about auditory processing in general. How does auditory processing affect someone's development? Like auditory processing, from childhood all the way through adolescence and adulthood.
That is a great question. And auditory processing is so important, especially at the very earliest ages. As adults, a lot of us spend time reading, but it's important to remember that reading is a very artificial skill, right? That came relatively recently with humans, and whereas speech is something that humans have been doing with each other for quite some time. And kids, a young person who has what's called an auditory processing disorder, which is a commonly referred to term, it means maybe the kid's brain is not working as quickly and accurately as we might like it to. And that can come from a number of reasons, right? Maybe they just got unlucky in the genetics. Maybe they had an ear infection at the wrong time, and so their ears were stopped up for 5 or 6 months before anyone really noticed. Maybe something else happened to their brain. Maybe they fell down and bumped their head a little bit, not enough to be noticeable, but just enough to disrupt those connections. In all those cases, when a person is then learning language, to go back to those confusing sounds like da and ga, which BrainHQ works so hard on. Imagine you're a kid and you're in school and a teacher is drawing a D sound and drawing a B, and they're saying to the kid, well, this one is a D sound and this one is a B sound. Well, if the poor kid's brain can't tell the difference between those sounds, it's going to be very confusing what the teacher says to them. And that's why kids, who have auditory processing disorders are commonly diagnosed as learning disabled, which in a way is true, right? They are having a hard time learning, but in a way is not true, right? They don't have an intellectual disability per se. They have an auditory processing disability. And that's why speech therapists who work with kids like that will work very specifically on auditory speed. That's why we have a cousin company, Scientific Learning, that you may have heard of, and they use many of these similar exercise concepts with kids who have that kind of auditory processing disorder. And, their studies have shown again and again that by speeding up the brains of kids, it can help them reestablish lost learning and catch up with other kids in their brain. But of course, auditory processing disorders can happen at any age. You may have had one your whole life and just never got well diagnosed. You may have thought, well, gosh, why am I always the person who can't hear something when we're at a party together? I guess my ears aren't too good. Well, maybe not your ears, might be the brain that needs some speeding up. And alternatively, even as an adult, you can develop an auditory processing disorder. It's a common enough symptom after a concussion, for example, or after other things that affect the brain, like chemo treatment or a viral infection, post-COVID symptom, for example. All these things can cause auditory processing disorder. And in all cases, I think our viewpoint is, hey, speeding up the brain, making the auditory systems faster and more accurate can help with that. So wonderful question. And I think there's still the opportunity to help a tremendous number of kids out there with this kind of science.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we have a couple of people asking about headphone usage with BrainHQ. Is it okay to use Bluetooth connected headphones? Is it okay to use a Bluetooth hearing aid? Is it okay to plug in headphones when training with BrainHQ? Our general answer to that is yes. If it is easier for you to listen to those exercises and even more so to help prevent distractions from outside stimuli,
Exactly.
headphones are really great to use with BrainHQ.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, in older days, people used to have a lot of questions about which headphones to use, and hey, maybe some were better than others. But, at this point in time, I think virtually any headphone that you're going to buy is going to be perfectly great to work with BrainHQ. If it's a wired connection, you're plugging it right into your computer, that's great. If it's a Bluetooth connection, you're connecting to your computer, your phone, that's also great. And exactly like you say, Stephanie, I think a lot of the benefit is just just being able to focus, right? I want to hear the dog barking. I don't need to hear what my neighbors are playing on their radio.
Yeah.
And headphones can be really great in that way. Now, if you don't have headphones, that's fine too. I mostly train on my laptop without headphones, just to share that with everyone. But if you do, I think they're a great way to help you focus and really get the most out of the training.
Yeah, definitely. And we have a couple of musicians in the Q&A section with a couple of music related questions for us. Can training with these exercises help me find the right singing notes? Is one of them. We have another one that says something along the lines of, can training with these exercises help me find the pitch that I'm seeking faster? Those are really great questions. Henry, do you have any insight?
It's a wonderful question. I myself have actually recently started taking music lessons, so it's been very fun for me. My mom started playing the harpsichord, which is a musical instrument, kind of like a piano, except it plucks the strings rather than hits them. She started playing when she was about 50, and she's in her 80s now. And I think that music training has been really good for her brain and her mental health. And of course, it's just wonderful to come visit her and hear this wonderful music playing. And of course, there's a deep relationship between the accuracy of your hearing and then your ability to play music. Sometimes we think of playing music as strictly a movement phenomenon, but it's not strictly movement, right? There's feedback between what you hear and what you play. And I'm terrible at certain aspects of hearing. People have perfect pitch, and I am just starting as a musician, and someone plays two notes and I can't tell which one is which, but I think that will come perhaps over time. So yeah, in all of these things, sharpening your brain's auditory processing, as you do with sound sweeps, for example, or as you do with fine tuning to be able to distinguish these kinds of sounds, all these things are going to sharpen and make more accurate, the entire regions of your brain that process sound, whether the sound is for music or for speech. And in that sense, over time, I think it's quite likely that they're going to, as you practice your own music as a musician, strengthen the connections between hearing music and playing music. Now, it won't surprise you. We're very science-based here at Posit Science. It's not going to surprise you that no one's ever done a classic randomized controlled trial of people doing BrainHQ while they learn music. So everything that I say is my best impression as a scientist. But since we know so much of that is connected to what you hear, I think it's really important. And for the question about finding the right note while you're singing, of course, that's very much a feedback process, right? Your vocal cords make the sound, but then it comes in through your ear. And if your auditory system is kind of, a little foggy, a little messy, a little noisy, that feedback loop itself is going to be foggy, messy, and noisy. But if you have an auditory system that's working sharply and quickly and accurately, I think your brain is going to find it easier to lock on to what you're trying to produce more easily. But I would love to hear back from folks as they do these auditory exercises and continue their musical studies. We would love to hear from you, and let us know what you're finding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fascinating idea of being able to use BrainHQ potentially for ear training, essentially. So that's definitely something that I'm going to have to consider when I'm doing the auditory exercises.
Well, I have to add one thing to that. Often people ask me about perfect pitch, right? And if you're not a musician, this is the ability that you hear a single note and you can say, oh, that's an A or that's a G. You can sort of name it right off the bat. And often people think that perfect pitch is somehow genetic or inherited, and that's not really the case. The nicest studies that have been done in this suggest that mostly perfect pitch comes from a lot of intensive early exposure to music in careful listening environments. So the reason it sometimes looks like it's inherited is because, well, commonly if a mom plays a lot of music, then the baby is going to hear a lot of music. But it is still nonetheless, I think, best understood as a phenomenon of brain plasticity. You hear a lot of music when you're young, your brain reorganizes itself to hear and understand that music, and then you get pretty good at naming notes. So there's hope for all of us, Stephanie, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. As a former pit orchestra musician who had to switch between instruments, it's very important to have auditory processing, be on top of it essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an interesting question from Sherry. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I have a cochlear implant. Is there any chance that training with BrainHQ can help that?
Oh, that is a wonderful, wonderful question. And of course, if you have a cochlear implant, I'm always really happy to hear that. As I mentioned, our founder, Dr. Michael Merznick, is one of several people who are all responsible for inventing that. And I think to this date, his work on the cochlear implant and helping people like yourself is some of the scientific work that he is most proud of. So I'm just delighted to hear it. Of course, when you get a cochlear implant, you are giving your auditory systems, your brain, totally new information, right? Usually a person who needs and gets a cochlear implant, they've had very poor hearing or maybe no hearing, and often for quite some time. So the brain has quite a lot of adapting to do in order to hear sound and process sound and then speech. That being said, again, I'll say this, there hasn't been a clinical trial yet, but we have every reason to think that the BrainHQ exercises are going to help you get used to your cochlear implant and get the most out of it as a result of intensively training your auditory system with the sound that comes in. And in fact, when Mike talks about the story of the very first cochlear implant that was ever used in a person, the first person who was brave enough to say, well, let's put this in my ear, doc, and let's see what it does. Mike has always told me when he tells this story, hey, it would have been a breakthrough if at the end of it I could clap, right? And that person can hear it. But Mike never expected that first patient was going to be able to understand speech. He thought the first cochlear implant was too crude, too preliminary, not detailed enough. And to his amazement, just a week or two after that first patient had the implant, they actually could start to understand speech that was, slow and emphatic. And actually, that's really what started to make Mike think about brain plasticity, because he knew, and he's a very humble guy, he knew that the first cochlear implant he built wasn't that great. So the only reason that he could figure out that first patient was able to understand speech with this admittedly not good cochlear implant is because the brain itself was changing and reorganizing to pull out the speech sounds. And it was actually that insight that started him on his journey of figuring out how brain plasticity worked, which of course led us eventually to BrainHQ and these exercises. So yeah, every reason to think that training the auditory system of your brain with a cochlear implant is going to help your brain make even better use of this wonderful medical breakthrough. So wonderful question, and I'll pass this on to Mike. He is, after all these years, still always delighted to hear of someone who's using this wonderful thing that he invented.
Yeah, truly. And listening to Mike talk about that story is also incredible if you ever get a chance to listen to that. All right, so we have a couple of questions, particularly about hear. So why is it categorized as a memory exercise instead of like a brain speed exercise? And we also have a couple of requests from several users to have you demo hear, if that's all right, and we have time for that. There seems to be some confusion about how to actually use that exercise.
Yeah, let me turn that on here, and let's share my screen, and let's hope that my my computer doesn't decide to
Sure.
give it up again. So if you haven't done the hear exercise, what it's going to do is it's going to play a sound. Okay, just a very simple tone like that. And then you're going to hear several sounds, one of which is those and several of which aren't. And you're going to have to click which one is the sound that you heard. So let's hear it again together. So try and keep that sound in mind. And now let's try the exercise. Well, it's teaching us now, so we'll go next. Okay, so we heard 5 sounds, and our job is to hear each of those sounds and say, well, which one, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, or the fifth, sounded most like the one that we were presented with. In this case, it was the 5th. Let's do another one together. Too high, too high, too high, too high. That one is just right. So when I'm doing the hear exercise, what I just said out loud, That's how I do the exercise. Each sound that comes in, I decide, is that too high or too low compared to the one I'm looking for. And then at the end, hopefully I have one that I think is right. Sometimes I have two and I have to guess, and that's okay. Guessing's always fine on BrainHQ. It was the last one there again. Let's do one more. Too low, maybe, too low, too low. Last one was too high. So here seemed like it was either the second or the fifth. I'm going to guess and say it was the second. Hey, we got lucky that time. So, why here, I'll pause this. And what I'll say is that, if you want a reminder about what the sound is, you can click that I button. Here, let me do that again just to show it. Here on the exercise, you can always click the I button to get more information. In the case of here, that will give you a chance to hear the sound again and kind of put it back into your memory. Now, why do we do this exercise? Well, what this exercise is trying to do is it's trying to sharpen your brain's attention. And what I mean by that is by holding that one sound in mind, your memory actually plays back into your attention and kind of forms a cone for that exact sound. And that helps you suppress the sounds that aren't that. And so what that auditory attention do is we're training you to focus on exactly what you're listening for and ignore the stuff you're not listening for. Does that make sense, Stephanie?
I certainly followed that.
Super. And of course, the way the exercise gets harder over time is we make the distracting sounds more and more similar to the target sound. So think of this as helping sharpen that focus of your auditory attention so that when you have something in mind, you're listening for that specifically and you're ignoring things that aren't like that. So that's the challenge of the exercise. But it's a challenging exercise. If you remember the slide I showed with the 7 auditory exercises on it, this is probably the most challenging in some ways of all 7 of those. But on the other hand, I think one that we all think is really quite helpful for building and sharpening that combination of attention and auditory function.
Yeah, I think there is an argument to be made that here is a multimodal exercise within BrainHQ, and that's primarily why it's in the memory category. Like, yes, it
you do have to remember the sound, and
yes,
that's in the memory category. Some of these exercises, they sort of exist at the intersection between speed and attention and memory, especially the more complex exercises. But we put this one in memory because you have to store it in your working memory. And of course, what you're asking your brain to do is to keep coming back to your memory to compare what's in your memory to the new sounds that are coming in and select from the new sounds that are coming in, which one is stored in your memory. So you can see we're really working on that interplay in that way. But if you're struggling with the exercise, I suggest you do it just like I did. Listen to the sound. Each one that comes in, just say out loud, does that sound too high? Does it sound too low? And hopefully that'll let you home in on 1 or 2 good ones to pick from in that way. Thanks.
Yeah, the other tip that I have for here, and this is really good if you are home alone and nobody else can hear you do it. Try and sing or try and match the pitch with the tone, and then you can kind of like hum that to yourself as the tones are being played, so it's easier to maybe match up that way. Again, not so good if you're like training in public or on public transport. You don't want to be like humming on the bus randomly. But if you're at home alone, you're with your family or somewhere where nobody's going to be bothered by the extra
supportive
sound.
Partner, a supportive
roommate. Exactly.
And that speaks a little bit to maybe what you had suggested around singing and learning music in that way.
Yeah. I think we have time probably for one more question before we wrap up here. We've had quite a few people write into us about having difficulty hearing higher frequencies in some of our exercises. My understanding is that that's kind of by design, but what should people do if they encounter, sweeps that are too high in sound sweeps, or if they encounter those boops in here that are a little too high pitched for them? Oh, you muted.
It's not my day here today, Stephanie. So it is a great question. And of course, high frequency hearing loss, that really actually does come from the ear. We talked about auditory processing disorder, which is really an issue in the brain and how fast the brain keeps up. High frequency hearing loss is really in the ear because the hair cells in the ear that vibrate when sound comes in, the short, stiff ones, they just wear out over time. And those are the ones that detect high frequency sounds. And so that we can lose those as we start to get older. So, if you're finding you're hitting an auditory sweeps, a sound sweeps exercise, and it's just too high, you can do one of two things. First of all, it's always fine to simply skip a level if that one is not for you today, and just move on to another level in sound sweeps or move on to another exercise. The other thing is, hey, you may find that on some levels on sound sweeps, you get a lot of them wrong and your performance goes down to 1 or 2 stars. And on other levels on sound sweeps, because the sounds are lower, your performance might be at 5, 3 stars or 4 stars. That's fine. It's completely okay to do better on some levels than others. Even if you're struggling and getting 1 star or 2 stars, on that level, which has high frequency sounds, hey, you're still actually helping that high frequency part of your brain take as much advantage as it can of the high frequency information that's coming in. So either way is fine. If you feel like you have to skip it or fine tuning with certain syllables, this comes up as well. That's fine. You have my official permission as someone who helped invent these exercises. That's okay. But if you're willing to push at it and don't feel bad if you get 1 or 2 stars, well, that's going to help your brain as well.
Yeah, and one last quick question that I want to squeeze in here because that answer came much more quickly than I had anticipated. But Janet asked, can you slow down the rate at which the sounds are coming at you? The answer is it depends on the exercise. So for some exercises like sound sweeps, the speed of the sweeps is a factor in that exercise. And so if a sweep is happening too quickly, one of the ways that the exercise adapts to your performance is it will slow down the sweep, so that way it's easier to make that differentiation. There are other exercises like here, I believe, where I don't think you can slow down the frequency of the tones. Like if you're at a 3-star rating and you're getting 5 tones, those 5 tones are going to come at you at the same speed each time you do that level. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Henry.
Well, that's exactly right. On the exercises that are more focused on speed as their primary dimension, they slow down if you get one wrong. And if it's getting too fast, do what I do, get a few wrong and slow it down again. That's fine. But like you say on here, they do come at a certain rate. And that's how the exercise is designed. That's how we want it to work. But again, if you get it wrong, the sounds in here will get more distinct from each other, and that will make it easier to do.
All right.
Wonderful question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and start wrapping up now. Thank you all, everybody, so much for participating in this office hours webinar. Again, sorry about the technical difficulties. We hope that you will join us for our next webinar next month. It's coming up actually in about 3 weeks now. Our next webinar is how altruism and gratitude shape the brain. So it's going to be a great webinar to tune into before the end of the year holidays. Now, if you have any further questions about any of the BrainHQ exercises, like I said, you can go to support.brainhq.com to find answers to common questions. You can also email our support team directly. Our email address is support@brainhq.com. Henry, do you have any other final parting words?
No, just thanks for all the enthusiasm and all the questions. As Stephanie said, we always get quite a few more questions than we're quite able to answer. I hope that some of this spoke to your question. If we didn't quite get to your question, feel free to email us at support@brainhq.com. We'd be happy to pick them up from there. And with that, thanks for coming and happy brain training, everyone.
Yep. Have a great day. Happy brain training.